I can see the rest of the team members, panelists, but not my video.
Yeah, we're live. Ashpreet, we are live. We can start the discussion.
Great. Good evening. I think we can start. Just a quick mic test. Can everyone hear everybody? Let's just do a quick hello.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
I can hear, but I
can't hear you, Mr. Bangya.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Amit, Shijoy, Jasmeet.
Hi, Ashpreet. I can hear you.
Hi, Ashpreet.
Yeah.
Hi, Ashpreet.
Ashpreet, I can hear you.
Can't hear Mr. Bangya. Can't hear Mr. Khurana.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Sandeep.
Okay, good. So,
all right, great. I think we can begin. Let's just begin with a quick round of introductions. Everybody, if we could take a minute each and just introduce ourselves. Anyone who would like to go first?
I can start.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shijoy. I am with Arama India, and I primarily work on the implementation of the Delhi EV policy.
Hi, my name is Amit Bhatt, and I lead the transport work at WRI India. And electric mobility is one of the key portfolios of Uber.
Hi, I'm Sandeep Bangya. I'm leading the electric mobility division for Tata Power, among other things. Good to be here in this panel this afternoon. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jasmeet with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I lead the Council's mobility decarbonization project in India and parts of it globally.
Yeah, am I the last one? Yeah, I am Ravindran Nambiar, and I am part of the WardWizard group. We have a flagship electric vehicle brand called Joy e-bikes, based out of Gujarat, Baroda.
Great. Thank you so much for the round of introductions. I am Ashpreet, and I work with RMI India, and a lot of people already know what we do. So let's just dive in. I think we are already running about 20 to 25 minutes late. My first question. So the first question will be for. We transition, all of us know that the industry has shared several recommendations related to going beyond subsidies, but we will be keen to hear what are your recommendations. I recently read you proposed tax abatement.
I don't know if it's just me, but I am losing Ashpreet a lot in between.
Yeah, we can't hear you clearly, Ashpreet.
Okay, I'll log back in. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can hear you, Ashpreet. Go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Okay,
Yeah.
We're again not able to hear you very well. So maybe you want to use an earphone or something. I think the problem is with your audio.
The moment you start speaking, you lose your audio.
I've also, while I do that,
Sure, we can see the chat box. Thanks.
So,
Banya, this question is for you, which you has typed in the chat box.
Tata Power has been at the forefront of EV transition in the industry.
Sandeep ji, there is a question for you in the chat box.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Okay. So good. I think first of all, thank you for getting me on this panel, and happy World EV Day to everyone this afternoon. And that's the occasion for the congregation, I would assume. I think when we look at Tata Power ourselves, we have not availed a single penny subsidy as of now. What we are really looking for is not really fiscal incentives, but really the encouragement from the way the things are implemented on the ground. Policy framework is fine. The government is talking the right things. There are the right sounds being made. The intent is very clearly there, whether it is the state government, whether it is the central government, and there are also a lot of right measures being proposed. However, because of the multiple agency involvement, the policy does not actually see the light of the day, which means, in fact, I was hearing the previous panel discussion also, wherein very clearly Vish Ganti's famous kitchen and two-wheeler is clearly a product of perfect policy, but somewhere down the line messed up implementation. The policy says that RWs have to implement, but whether the urban development body will do it, whether the power department will do it, or whether the RWs have to be instructed to do it, I think that's where it's a Chinese whisper, and the things get lost in transition. Similarly, the things like whether the power capacity enhancement needs to be done, who has to do it, is there an instruction? So the policy intent does not reach the last mile, and that's where we almost always land up faltering. So we've been trying to do our bit by navigating through all this web and still putting up 700 plus chargers, 6,000 plus home chargers, 129 cities. But yeah, things could have been much easier if there was possibly a single window or policy to implementation. The line would be either a straight line. Today it is like all over the place. That's broadly what. And I just read something I read about proposed tax abatement as an alternative. I don't get that part, so I don't know whether that part is something which Ashpreet, you want to ask something on that tax abatement.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes, awesome. No, I was reading one of your interviews where you said that instead of subsidies, tax abatement is something that the government could consider. So I wanted to check with you if you would want to throw light on that.
Yeah. So I think the subsidy portion is well covered. I think what I had said was that in EV domain, we would be much keener on non-fiscal incentives. When I say non-fiscal incentives, not just as a company, Tata Power as a company, but even as a consumer, I'd be very happy to see encouragement by the authorities in the form of non-fiscal subsidies. Like today, you get with a car, you get 1 lakh, 1.5 lakhs, or with a scooter, you get about 30,000, 20,000 rupees. But the encouragement would be more in terms of, let us say, free parking in municipal corporation parkings, like a free toll or a discounted toll. Those kind of things just gives a message that EVs are the priority of the government. They not necessarily cost money. And finally, I think the classic example of the slip between the cup and the lip, as they call it, let the instructions go right to the last mile to ensure that I don't want incentives. I don't want money per se, because money is always going to be a small part of the entire ecosystem, what we actually land up spending. But what is more important is the effort and hence the time that and the money that goes into spending that effort to make these things happen. That's the thing. I think tax is something that government is doing enough, or at least the intent is enough from what they're planning. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Actually, just taking your point forward about how two-wheelers is a segment and how subsidies is the focus of the government. If we could get in Mr. Nambiar here, the two-wheeler market has been India's heart and soul. Everyone knows that. And the government is going gun blazing with central and state policies to provide incentives. But two and three-wheelers have gained traction. But what, according to you, Mr. Nambiar, are the bottlenecks? And the biggest question here, because the topic is policy beyond subsidies, what happens once these subsidies are stopped?
Yes, thank you for having me on this panel discussion. World EV Day, happy World EV Day to all of you. Very rightly put, the topic itself, the policy beyond subsidy. Yes, we cannot negate the factor that the government is helping us with a lot of policy benefits. The policy makers, it shows very right and very sensitive approach towards the entire ecosystem by the policy makers. But as rightly, and it is surely helping the mass adoption of electric vehicles in India. It's surely helping big time because of the various fiscal incentives suggested by the policy. But rightly said, we also want something beyond policy. And I see a lot of traction happening on the charging infrastructure. So I was part of the earlier, I was just hearing out the earlier discussion when it was completely around a lot of charging infrastructure and support and charging support and various things are happening over there. So I feel the Indian automotive EV industry, it has to go beyond the policy structure, and it is definitely going thanks to a lot of participation already coming from a lot of the private enterprise, and at the same time private enterprise is willing to fork out that extra for putting up the good show on the EV industry. So that's what I feel. If we talk about only subsidy, yes, it has helped, but there are a lot of tax structures that has to be looked at, a lot of import policies that has to be looked at, a lot of fiscal incentives actually while qualifying the manufacturers have to be looked at. So various things also have to go beyond subsidy. That's what I feel. That's what I feel always.
Great, thank you so much for that. So, just taking on the point from both speakers we heard right now, Amit, would like to come to you with this question. You've recently launched the Forum for Decarbonizing Transport in India with Niti Aayog. Based on your vast experience, you've been around. Can you share some ways in which diverse stakeholders can play a crucial role in making policies that focus more on implementation than subsidies?
Thanks a lot, Ashpreet. And I think one is that I think electric mobility or transition to electric vehicle is not just a technology change, it's a systemic change that needs to happen. And for systemic change, I think what needs to be done is that we need to develop this ecosystem. And therefore, you will need multiple players in that ecosystem doing multiple things. Only then the ecosystem will change. And so, for example, we talked about policies, but policies are catalysts, right? And then what you need is what happens beyond policy. Similarly, subsidies are a catalyst. And so what happens beyond subsidy? I think that's the conversation that we need to have. And therefore, that cannot happen only in isolation with one agency or one state government or one department of the government. And this will require bringing multiple players together. So one of the reasons why we thought this was important is that because a lot of stakeholders who are very important in this ecosystem are really not meeting together. So a lot of times what we have seen is that you've seen conferences, webinars, a lot of this consultation. We see a lot of the usual suspects, if I can use the word, right? So the same set of people who are meeting over and over again. But there's a huge subset which wants to contribute, which wants to be heard, but there is no mechanism to hear those voices. So we thought, let's create this forum for decarbonization of transport. where we will bring in public sector for sure, but this will have a very active representation from private sector, from civil society, from academia, from a lot of individuals who are working, a lot of people who have their opinion on the space. And what we will do as part of this is that we will convene regularly on the topic of decarbonization. And the idea being that this cross-fertilization of thoughts will lead to a better kind of preparedness for ecosystem change. So we launched this last month, but going forward, we will be touching base on the various facets of electric mobility, but also to look at some of the newer technologies which are emerging, especially the green hydrogen and all, so that in the long term, we can transition towards cleaner mode of transport. So that's what was the intention of this work.
Great, thank you so much for that. We'll just move on to a very interesting publication by a coalition with 30 businesses giving their inputs on what policies can India adopt to become a global EV leader. I'll bring in Jasmeet here. Can you highlight 5 quick action items related to policies that have been highlighted in this report? 30 businesses is quite a number here.
Sure. Thanks, Ashpreet. So I think the objective of our work is to support policy on behalf of businesses who we represent as an organization. But I think just before I come to the specific recommendations, I think what's important to keep in mind is that policy itself, I mean, we do still have policy for telecom, for handloom, for all sorts of sectors. So policy is not going away. Subsidy is a part of it, and subsidy even for mature sectors, there are subsidies depending on what the objectives are for those sectors, right? So I think RMI has its own kind of vision in terms of that you did with Niti on what the ambition should be, and which is one of the key recommendations in our report is that India should have an ambition which then guides policy as well as market actions to make sure that we are achieving the kinds of targets that we set for ourselves. So what we are doing there as a kind of a follow through of the paper, the policy paper that you talked about, is that we are getting CEOs to sign an ambition statement which asks the government of India to announce a target of 65% vehicle sales to be electric by 2030. Obviously, a big part of it comes from two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which is not a part of EV 30 at 30 that India is already a signatory to. But even with 65% new sales and assuming an S-curve to get there by 2030, we will only have reached about 20% or lesser in terms of vehicle stock being electric in 2030, right? Which is still an emerging market. So even in 2030, we would still be at about 20% stock, right? So we would still be grappling with how to grow the charging infrastructure. We may have by then solved some of the manufacturing related issues. We may have solved some of the consumer acceptability issues and all of those things, but we would still be kind of going up from 20% to vehicle stock and upwards to whatever percent, probably 100% by 2050 or 2060, right? So that's what we're trying to grapple with. Subsidy itself is a small part of triggering this market. It is really important. I will not discount the role of subsidy in any sector. I think it works. It has to be done properly. It needs to be disbursed on time. And all of these things need to happen, but it works, right? And we are at a stage in the market where subsidies are required to cross that threshold of TCO calculation or upfront cost calculation where adoption starts to happen. In that context, a couple of recommendations in the report are around that. So currently, for example, we have subsidies for public transport, which make up about 15% of the bus stock, but we don't have subsidy for the remaining 85% of buses or sale of buses, right? So can we extend subsidies there? Can we be more ambitious on that front? For private cars, I mean, we don't specifically call out private car subsidy in the policy paper, but we see this lot of kind of brouhaha about two-wheelers being the kind of the champions of the market. But like for everyone's information, 8 out of 1,000 two-wheelers sold in India today are electric, and exactly 8 out of 1,000 cars sold in India are electric. So even though everyone kind of assumes that two-wheelers will be the only thing which will take us forward, I don't think that will be true. We are neck to neck between two-wheelers and four-wheelers. Obviously, in absolute numbers, two-wheelers are more, but in absolute value, again, two-wheelers are much lower, right? So cars are also important. I think we need to move towards shared mobility. So fleets will be really important. In that context, this policy paper talks a lot about how ride-hailing, deliveries, uh, and urban freight can be kind of incentivized through subsidies themselves. But as kind of we phase out subsidies, we move into a lot of ease of doing business, which is where a lot of our recommendations around battery swapping or charging infrastructure come in, which will be really important catalysts as well. And there, sorry, and there I think the really important thing for the government to do is to create market rules. We don't yet know who pays for what, who, like RWA, we got that example, right? Who's responsible for what, who pays for grid upgradation? Is it the fleet operator? Is the charge point operator? Is it the fleet or the building owner? All of these market rules need to be put in place. Some of these costs around grid upgradation need to be socialized. So a lot of market rules are required, which is where policy beyond subsidies will be really, really important, and not just after subsidies, even today. So we need to create these market rules. Different ministries need to work together to do that. And I think getting real estate sector, getting the mobility sector, and getting the energy sector to work together through these market rules and through these formulations will be really crucial to the success of any policy.
Thanks, Jasmeet. So sorry, I think we are running out of time. So quickly, we'll go over to Shijoy. So Shijoy, we know RMI India has a vast experience in terms of advising governments on making their policies. So what will be your top 5 recommendations that states could consider to focus on beyond subsidies, or what are the other ways that states could look at?
Yeah. Thanks, Ashpreet. No, let me start by kind of agreeing to what Jasmeet was saying. I think incentives are important, and I think what is more important is which aspect of the segment is the incentive targeted at. So which vehicle segment, what aspect of charging infrastructure, how to operationalize into subvention, for instance. So incentives are important, but its targeting is even more important. Coming to what we can think of in terms of policy beyond subsidy, I can think of majorly, it can be looked at a macro level and a micro level. At the micro level, 2 points. I think one is the need for capacity building. Eventually, implementing of these policies will happen at the city level or the urban local body level. And like most of us, for officials at these levels, this is an entirely new paradigm, the transition to clean mobility. And therefore, it is important that, that officials here, there is capacity building for officials here. A solution could really be to, at these levels, identify across departments EV champions and organize training, capacity building at the central level, where aspects like charging infrastructure, business models, these can be discussed, and more training can be imparted to officials who are at the forefront of implementing this policy. So that would be one. Second, I think again at the micro level, it's important to have institutional mechanisms for implementation. Like I think Amit was pointing out, there are multiple stakeholders that are involved in implementing policy. At least this is true for most policies, but I think when it comes to EV, it is several notches higher, because you have transport, power, landowning agencies, the MCDs, the finance department, financing, the discoms, autonomous bodies. So it's very important that there are institutional mechanisms that can bring these stakeholders together into decision making. For instance, in Delhi, for charging infrastructure, there is an accelerated working group for accelerated rollout, which has representatives from the state's think tank, from discoms, from all MCDs, from power department, transport department, which really kind of helps to bring about coordinated action. At the macro level, just 2 quick points. One, I think what we are missing is the need for a national strategy for clean mobility transition. There are several state level approaches, which from an implementation perspective may be good. But I think from an industry perspective, it's important to have some form of consistency, to remove blind spots, to be able to understand how the government is viewing different aspects, the role for the private sector, the role for discoms, how, on standards, on interoperability, those clarity, that clarity needs to be there. And to be sure, this will be kind of a living document. You will learn from cities, you will evolve this strategy. But as of now, that strategy is missing. which I feel is very important to put in place. The last bit is, I think is what I'll call as collective action. Generally in policy, there is a trade-off, because large scale change is always incremental, and radical change you have to compromise on scale. But with EVs, I think we have a unique opportunity. I feel the transition to clean mobility is inevitable. So we have an opportunity where different stakeholders can come together, governments and private sector and autonomous bodies and think tanks, and be able to kind of do coordinated action, do collective action on targets, on timelines, and on standards, and achieve what I call as radical change at scale. So yeah, I'll take a pause there, and yeah, back to you, Ashpreet.
Great, thank you so much. We've been sent constant reminders that our time is up. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. And back to you, Shivam, if you would like to take over.
Thank you, Ashpreet. I think we'll end the session. We have the next group of people waiting for them to take the stage. So yeah, nice meeting you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.